join us in this last Amen. Taken from Rays of the One Light, Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita. This week is Living in the Presence of God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 25, we read of a king, capitalized for the reference is to God, who welcomes certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. The elect asked him when it was that they had served him in these ways, and the king answered, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed he does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving him. Paramhansa Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as the greatest man of humility I ever knew. He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. And then another day found me walking alone near the Howrah railroad station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they use the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition, I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashaya. Sir, how come you here? The saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? He passed his arm around me affectionately. I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for him everywhere. If you would hear his voice, listen for it in all sounds and also in their supporting silences. If you would know God, seek his wisdom behind merely human knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter states, One who beholds my presence everywhere, and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him, through all eternity. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Surendra. I'm here with Lorna and also with Bharati and Dambra, and it is our joy to be with you this morning. Living in the presence of God. I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. It is number 128 at the bottom of page 99. I looked at a flower and prayed. Suddenly, O Father, I beheld thee behind there. It exuded to me the perfume of thy presence. I saw the blush of thy purity coloring its petals. It was the gold of thy wisdom that shone in its heart. Thine all-embracing, upholding power filled its delicate calyx. The mystery of life and immortality lay in the pollen lifted by the bee when it tasted thy sweetness. O teach me thy wonders of creation, which are hinted at in even the tiniest roadside weed. living in the presence of God is a very lovely idea. Seeing Him in all that is, serving Him in faith and in fact. But in this world of endless distractions, how do we make that happen? How do we make it real? God, how do we even relate to Him in a realistic way? And I say him or she, because God is not a someone in our sense of normal experience. If God appeared like a next-door neighbor and we could just hang out with Him, maybe at a nice cafe or a quiet park, then living with God would be easy. But it's not that easy. God is more abstract. God is not only formless, He is formlessness. It's said that His body is space, and that when God speaks, the sound is that of silence. God cannot be interviewed like some public person, some public figure. He cannot be photographed or described, and no scientific method can even prove that God exists. So, living in the presence of God is not always such an easy task to accomplish. And we don't get very much help from our society either. Does not particularly support our efforts to live in the presence of God. And yet, according to every saint and master who has walked this earth the same as we, God is real. He is ever present, ever ready to help us, ever accessible when we seek Him with sincerity, with true love and devotion. Our teachings tell us, as it said in the reading today, to see God in everything, in everyone, everywhere. But, well, that's a lovely idea too, but it's not so easy to accomplish either. I have to confess that I forget to do that frequently enough, especially if the everywhere is someplace that I'm not particularly excited about being, someplace unpleasant, or if the everyone is someone that I'm not getting along with very well and is pushing my buttons and giving me a headache. These things happen. There are expressions of human behavior, I'm sure you will admit, that don't necessarily lend themselves readily to seeing God in their midst. Here's another challenge that we face in trying to be with God all the time. Think of a time when you badly stubbed your toe. Maybe you were crossing the dark room at night barefoot and went into a piece of furniture. And in that moment of impact, when you were literally having your breath taken away and you stood there writhing in pain, did it strike you that at that moment you were living in the presence of God? As you know, as the nerves in your foot were sort of screaming at you, did you see that moment as part of God's plan to help you with your spiritual growth? If you did, you're more advanced than most of us, and I congratulate you. But you know, life on this planet is not designed to be a smooth ride. Not from day to day, not even necessarily from minute to minute. But Yogananda, Master, would often admonish his disciples, take care of the minutes. It's the minutes that count the most. And that means looking for the message, that important message just for you, even in those moments that are very difficult to tolerate, because God is there too. On a beautiful day in the company of friends, it's very easy to feel God's blessings, isn't it? But a death in the family, for example, or a serious injury, perhaps the collapse of a marriage or the loss of a job, these are not as likely to evoke that grateful response. But you can be sure that if you allow that experience to pass simply by sinking into a mood of misery or despair, you're only preventing, by your reaction, the opportunity to discover what there is in that moment that is there for you to assimilate and to grow on. There are myriad stories in the lives of saints that recount the ordeals that God has required them to overcome. The Buddha, under the Bodhi tree, was tormented by Mara, the devil, before he was able to achieve his enlightenment. Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness, who offered him dominion over the entire world, and it required unbelievable power and faith and courage to say, "Get thee behind me." Saint Anthony was tormented by demonic forces, as was Martin Luther and Padre Pio, and our own Swami Kriyananda was vilified in the media by those who betrayed him and then subjected to lies in a public court of law. Master himself endured much the same. Can you imagine? In response to these ordeals, I imagine you've heard this before, but I love the remark by St. Teresa of Avila. She was crossing a swollen river, I believe, on horseback. She was not a young woman at the time, and she was swept into the stream and nearly drowned, was eventually deposited, drenched and exhausted on a shore far downstream, and Jesus appeared to her in human form and said, "Don't be upset, Teresa. This is how I treat all my friends." To which Teresa replied, "That, my Lord, is why you have so few." Master said that living for God is martyrdom. Now, isn't that a comforting thought? But such has been the case throughout history. When a person chooses a way of life that does not necessarily conform to social customs and ideals, many may mark that person as a bit odd, and others may find him even threatening to their own beliefs and their own practices. And when you have judgment of that sort, there is likely to be persecution and perhaps even cruelty. But when you have risen spiritually to the level of these great souls and of Swamiji, for example, the inner peace and joy that is felt in giving yourself to God, it is simply such that you're no longer at the mercy of anyone else's criticism of you. You're above that. You are one with Spirit. Swamiji was the epitome of that bliss, that ability to be blissful under all circumstances through all of the physical trials and mental trials that he endured. Sister Gyanamata, who was Master's foremost woman disciple, spent the last years of her life much disabled and in a great deal of pain. And yet, all the while, she was serving Master at every moment's notice, joyfully, whenever there may have been a need to fill. Alas, we're not quite there yet, are we? Hopefully getting closer, but still with a ways to go. When we have troubles at work, when we have troubles at home, financial worries, the onset of an injury or an illness, these are not the reminders of God's love that instantly bring forth our appreciation. But that's when we need that appreciation perhaps most of all. I find it very helpful to simply say thank you, no matter what comes my way, whatever hardship there may be, because I know that I have a choice in how every event affects me. I can face each one constructively or calmly, or I can react with agitation, which will only make matters worse. And believe me, I speak from experience. Secondly, I know that every little wrinkle in my life, whether it's karma from something in this life or in the past, it's my responsibility. Third, I know that whatever comes to me is coming from God, and that if I make the most of it by my attitude and my attunement in meeting it in right spirit, I know that I will be happier, a solution will come sooner than later, and also that I'll be wiping that off of my karmic to-do list, and that feels good even when the circumstances don't. I'm also reminded that every choice I make is directional. I can move in the direction of God or away from Him. If I choose to create more distance between the two of us, how does that serve me? Except to add more baggage to the karmic load that I'm already carrying. Is it possible to see God everywhere when there is great hardship and terrible pain? Perhaps you know the story of the artist Cellini. He was imprisoned by his patron in a dungeon, and he was spending his time in the company of rats and roaches. He was barely fed enough to keep him alive, and he was forced to sleep on a damp mattress. And from this incarceration, he emerged more blissful than ever, filled with the light of God, for it was God who came to him, who answered his prayers by his faith, who sustained him throughout. Cellini needed only his faith to make it through that experience and to grow spiritually. And we saw Swamiji throughout his life, and especially during the last 2 decades, enduring life-threatening surgeries, the loss of his hearing, the experience of utter frailty and exhaustion as a result of disabilities and debilitating illnesses that he had. all the while becoming even more blissful as the challenges became greater. Amazing. You know, from the moment that we arrive on this planet, it's only a matter of time before we will leave it. Whether you are young or old, strong or in failing health, giving ourselves into God's hands is the greatest assurance we have that our passing will be a transition of peace and joy to the next higher plane of our existence. In the words of the great Indian saint Ramana Maharshi, the only real death is in forgetting your true divine nature. And also to quote from Paramahansa Yogananda, the great lesson in death is that you cannot die. Your body, your mind, they may leave, they will, but your consciousness goes on and is eternal. So why in this life would we even choose to suffer, which we often do? To know the presence of God in heart, mind, and soul is the greatest blessing, no matter the hardship, no matter the test. Pain may come, I'm sure that it will, sometimes unabated, but suffering is a choice. Why allow it? What comes of itself, Master said, let it come. It is there to help us grow, to grow stronger, wiser, and more aware of God's power within us. God is present, always beckoning us to be with Him. Why would we ever choose to be anywhere else? God bless you. Let's just take a moment of reflection.
It's entitled God, God, God. The words of this are adapted from Yogananda's poem, God, Christ, Guru, with the music by Swami Kripa. From the depths of slumber as I ascend the spiral stairway of wakefulness, I will whisper, the food, and when I break my fast of nightly separation from thee, I will taste thee and mentally say, God, God, God. No matter where I go, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning on thee, and in the battle din of activity, my silent war cry will be, God, God, God. When boisterous
boisterous storms of trial shriek, and when worries howl at me, I will drown their noises, loudly chanting, God, God, God. When my mind weaves dreams, with threads of memory, on that magic cloth will I emboss God, God. In waking, eating, working, dreaming, sleeping, serving, meditating, chanting, divinely loving, my soul will constantly hum, unheard by any. God, God, God. Please join me for the last prayer.